You ever hear that common saying, you can't be logical all the time, or you can't be logical about everything? Dumb. That's really stupid. Let's just think about this for a second. If you're not being logical, you're being illogical. If you're not being reasonable, you're being unreasonable. And if you're not being rational, you're being irrational. Okay? It's kind of silly to say you can't be logical all of the time, because if you are logical sometimes and then not logical, illogical others, well, then you're being illogical. Let's imagine we're doing a math equation and you're following every single step of the equation. And then at this final step over here, you just say, screw it. You just forget all the rules, the mathematical rules, all the logical rules there, and just make up your answer from there. Well, that's not logical. That's not following the rules of mathematics. Your answer would not be accepted on a test. Imagine that you just say, hey, X is 5, teach. And the teacher's like, well, how did you get to that? Right? In any conversation, we have to, conversation, science, this isn't just, right? It could be a scientific debate, or it could be an argument between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or a husband and wife, or a brother and sister, whatever. If people are going to understand each other, they have to understand each other's reasons. We have to understand each other's perspectives and their reasons for thinking what they're thinking, for the positions they have, for their conclusions, right? Does that make sense? So let's say, I got to preface all this because a lot of the time when people think that someone has to be like logical about everything, or like there isn't some kind of objective truth, some people are going to say things like there are no absolutes, or everything is relative, there is no truth. And can we just look at those for a second? Like, there are no absolutes. Like, do you mean that absolutely? Everything is relative? Everything? There is no truth? Is that true? Right? Do you see how these types of ideas are self-imploding? They make no sense even on their own before we try to dissect them. And then there's the other way to look at when people think that you can't have objective truths, or you can't be logical about everything, is they can't separate this idea that some things are preferences and some things are objectively true. Okay? 2 + 2 = 4 is objectively true. Okay? We can't argue that. We can take 2 and 2, we can separate it into 1, 1 and 1, 1, and it's still going to get 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, no matter how we try and do things here, 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. Right? That's reality. That's what truth is. It's based off of reality, and that's why you reason. Reason is taking logical induction, deduction from the information, the evidence given, and then finding your conclusions based off of that. Right? That's objective. But we still have things that are preferential, and for some reason, that's something that people tend to not grasp when we're having these conversations, because they think that perspectives and preferences mean that you can't have absolute truths. And what I mean by that is, if I say, what's the best ice cream in the world between chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry? To me, I'm going to say strawberry ice cream is the best. That's a preference. It's not objectively true. I'd like to say it's objectively true and tell you you're stupid if you don't think strawberry ice cream is the best. But it's not objectively true. It's a preference. Everyone's going to have different preferences as to what their favorite ice cream is, or what their favorite burger, type of pizza, pineapple, yes or no on the pizza, whatever, right? These are preferences. So everything doesn't have to have an absolute answer when we're talking about preferences. But when we are talking about absolute, like objective reality, yes, there are things there that we cannot deny. And I'm going to start with things like 2 + 2 = 4, folks. This table is right here. I am real. You are real. Existence exists. A is A. You are a conscious being. These are things we cannot deny. Okay? So when we're having arguments, when someone says things like, everything is relative, or that's my truth, that's your truth and this is my truth, or there are no absolutes, you can't be logical about everything. This is a person who's trying to evade. They are evading having the conversation any further because it makes them uncomfortable to have to accept a belief system that they hold on to, or a conclusion or an opinion that they hold on to that probably identifies them, and they don't want to let go of it, or to simply acknowledge that maybe there's no basis for thinking what they're thinking. makes people uncomfortable, especially when their whole lives are based around this. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a scientific debate on how to get, whether or not you should get a jab, or whether we are talking about preferences of ice cream, or whether a husband or a wife is right or wrong in a scenario. Everything has to be logical in the sense we have to have reasons, and we should be striving to understand each other's reasoning. One of the things I always get is like, you always think you're right, and you are almost always right. And that bothers people for some reason. But it's like, I don't think I'm always right. I think I'm always striving to be reasonable. And by being reasonable, you most often end up being right. Because when you're reasonable, you're looking at empirical evidence, the facts, the stats, the data, everything in front of you, and you are only drawing conclusions that are reasonable, that make sense. And then from there, we might have all of this evidence that shows something. Let's say we're looking at a medical procedure and whether it is safe or unsafe. There might be all of this evidence that shows it's safe, and then all of this evidence that shows it's unsafe. And we start picking away at these things. And we say, okay, now let's start thinking about possibilities and probabilities. Is it possible? Yes or no? Okay, that's simple. Is it possible? Yes or no? Like a fun one, a really fun one is it possible for corruption to exist and conspiracy to exist outside of Hollywood movies? Is it possible? Yes or no? Okay. And then we look at the body of evidence and we see, well, is it probable? Oh, this company has this much money invested in this and this much money invested in this. So they own 50% of this, 50% of this, 50% of this. This politician owns that. The probability seems to be stacking up a certain way. Is it possible that these people are being censored because the media is run by XYZ and, the government funds the media this much, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever? Possibilities and probabilities. And that's what we explore. And that's why we have to be open to conversations. We have to explore other people's reasoning. That is being logical. You are being illogical if you are ignoring evidence, right? You're just straight up ignoring evidence, or you're ignoring other people's reasoning. You're not addressing it, and you're just sticking to what makes you comfortable. Because you're literally not reasoning when you're doing that. That is like having a math equation with multiple variables. And as people show you what different variables are, their values, you refuse to plug it into the equation because you like the answer as it is. Do you get that? If you know some things are absolute, then you got to throw them in there. If you know that x equals 2, then you got to put 2 where x is in your equation, right? Does that make sense? Am I being unreasonable with that? Because that's how it works, folks. That's really how it works. And even in these situations, I talk about possibilities and probabilities. An educated mind or an intelligent mind can entertain ideas without accepting them. So we can look at these variables in the math equation and we can say, well, we don't know what this x and y and z values are, but we can hold some steady and say, what if? What if it equals 5? Then the conclusions might be this. What if it equals 10? Then the conclusion might be this, right? So we can explore ideas together. That's what the whole idea of being reasonable and having conversations is about. It is about people getting on the same page, acknowledging all of the information that is solid, right? All of the information that can't be refuted, and then trying to draw logical conclusions from that together, right? That's what being reasonable is about. What is unreasonable? Unreasonable is ignoring things. Not knowing things, not being nescient, ignoring things. Ignorant is ignoring, not nescient, not knowing. When information is presented to you and you refuse to plug it into the equation, COVID, when that happens, you're being ignorant. And that is illogical, irrational, unreasonable. And that's what it feels like we are stuck with right now when one side of the population is trying to push a conversation and wondering why people are being silenced, and the other side is just brainwashed and not even acknowledging that some of these variables need to be plugged into the equation.